Hi, it's Sean. Welcome to my channel, EV Intuition, where I'm helping you understand about electric vehicles. Today, we're in a period of time where it is a pretty advantageous time to purchase an electric vehicle. We have a situation where the supply of electric vehicles outweighs the demand, giving you the lowest prices that we've ever seen. That, coupled with the continued incentives from the federal, state, and sometimes local uh, authorities and governments, it's making it a very nice time to buy. So if you're in the market for an electric vehicle, I want to talk to you about the aspects of an electric vehicle that you ought to be aware of and that you ought to compare between different vehicles that you're looking at so that you get the best vehicle for your situation. So let's get started. Before I begin today, I want to remind you that if you like the content of my videos, please subscribe and give me a like or send me any comments that you have. Today we're talking about the aspects of electric vehicles that you should know about or use to compare between other electric vehicles when making a purchase decision. So I have a list of a bunch of things that I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to go into them in just a small amount of depth just to keep this video reasonably short. So let's begin. Let's talk about the first aspect, and that's to many people the most important, the purchase price. And what I typically say for electric vehicles is look at the incentives associated with that particular vehicle, if there are any. Now, the federal government and state governments throughout the U.S. typically have incentives for certain types of vehicles. And so look into that. Look into see if that particular vehicle that you're looking at qualifies for that incentive. The federal incentive is pretty sweet, up to $7,500 for new vehicles and up to $4,000 for used vehicles. So that's also very good. And that applies also to the fully electric vehicles and also to plug-in vehicles. So that's something to keep in mind. And I give you the web address there, fueleconomy.gov, where you can get details on which vehicles are eligible for the federal incentive. Now, the state incentives obviously vary state by state. Now, I live in New York State, and the incentive currently right now, and it changes constantly. 2 years ago when I bought my Ford Mach-E, it was different than when I bought my Tesla Model Y in 2023. So you always got to keep up to date with that because these incentives change on a year-to-year basis, but you can today get up to $2,000 for new vehicles in New York State. And I particularly, when I bought my Tesla last year, I got $500 for that. But I did get $2,000 several years ago when I bought my Ford Mach-E. So it's always good to keep up to date with that and check the particular vehicle for that discount. And I give you the web address for looking at that. The other thing that to keep in mind is there may be other incentives. In New York State, there's an Easy Pass system for using the throughway or tollways here, and they have a discount that if you have an electric vehicle, you get 10% off that while going on those tollways. Keep that in mind and look for other incentives in your state. The other thing I say is sometimes local or municipal areas have incentives. So look into that. See what your particular area has. Some offer free chargers. I know for a while there in my area, they were giving a bunch of free home chargers to people. Now, I missed out on that just by a little bit, but those are some of the things that happen. And in particular, dealers and manufacturers also have incentives when purchasing vehicles, such as free limited time DC fast charging. Always look into the incentives as part of your overall cost. Now, the second thing that I think is very important to look into in regards to electric vehicles is when you're purchasing the vehicles, does a charger come with it? And if not, that means you're going to have to purchase a AC charger for your home if you don't already have one. It's always important to look into that. When I bought my 2021 Ford Mach-E, it came with a Ford mobile charger, which was great because I didn't have a charger for any electric vehicles at my home at the time. And I used that to charge my vehicle throughout the 2 years that I had it. Now, Ford has since made that now a additional purchase for your electric vehicle. They don't give it away with the purchase of the vehicle. So those are the things you got to keep in mind is what comes with that vehicle. Is there an AC charger involved? Do you need one? And if you do, keep some of that as the cost that you're going to have to also pay for besides the electric vehicle. Now, the next thing that I want to make sure that you're aware of is what charging connector does that vehicle have? Now, this is very important because we are in a transitional period here where in the US and North America, we are now going to move to one standard, and that is the North America Charging Standard, or NACS, or NACS for short. It's also referred to as the Tesla Standard, or J3400. That's the future of charging connectors for electric vehicles, as nearly all the car manufacturers have agreed to move to that particular standard. Yet today we really have two standards. We have that NACS standard out there, which is on all Tesla vehicles, and now Ford and GM and Stellantis and others are all saying they're going to start building cars in 2025 with that connector on. So what's that mean for this year? That means that if you're purchasing a vehicle this year that does not have a NACS connector, which most of them don't, you want to make sure that you can get an adapter for that. And many manufacturers agree to give adapters away free of charge. Some are charging it. So once again, this is something that you want to have if your particular vehicle has the CCS connector. That's the combined charging standard, which most manufacturers have on them today, but won't in another couple years. So make sure you have an adapter from the CCS to the NACS if you're purchasing a vehicle with a CCS adapter. The other thing to keep in mind is just because you have a NACS adapter, which is compatible from a physical point of view to the Tesla Supercharging Network, which happens to be the premier electric vehicle charging network in the US, is that it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work. Tesla has to turn on the capability for that particular vehicle manufacturer to charge there. And Ford has already had that turned on. GM is, I guess, right around the corner, and others are going to follow shortly. So keep that in mind, that you also want to have the ability of your vehicle to use that Tesla Supercharger network, which is their DC fast charger network. Now, another aspect of an electric vehicle that you should be aware of is its range. Range is important because the range of electric vehicles tend to be less than what we're used to in gas vehicles. Today, though the range of electric vehicles can go up to 500 miles, most of the electric vehicles today do 300, somewhat less than that. And the other thing you have to keep in mind, and this is a very important part, is that electric vehicle range is less on the highway as compared to city driving. So the EPA gives you a figure for range of an electric vehicle that is combined city and highway. And you can expect sometimes to get less range on the highway than what the EPA gives you. So what I'm telling you to do is find the EPA range of the vehicle, and that's typically in the specs, or it can be found on the fueleconomy.gov website, also for all the different vehicles out there. But also, there's a lot of websites out there, from Inside EVs to Motor Trend to Consumer Reports, that realize that EPA range is somewhat distorted, and what you really want is a real world range number. And these sites tend to do that often with what they call a 70 mile an hour range test. They drive the vehicle at a constant 70 miles per hour and see how far that vehicle can go. So, and then give you a range and then compare it with the EPA. And I'm showing you in this particular slide from the Inside EVs website, which did a bunch of vehicles. And you can see as a comparison the different vehicles and how they differ from the EPA to their realistic. And I kind of highlighted two vehicles similar to the ones I have, the Tesla. Now that was a Tesla Model Y 2020. I have a 2023, but it's probably similar. And the Ford Mach-E standard range, when looking at the chart, one of the things that you'll notice is that the Tesla Model Y's actual range or real world range is a lot less than its EPA range. And that's one of the things that the Teslas have been noted for. So you've got to look at your particular vehicle and maybe your vehicle's manufacturer, because they tend to differ when comparing the EPA range with actual real world range. And you can see the Ford Mach-E was a little closer. It showed it a little better than EPA range. My experience with mine was it was just a little less. So that's something to look at and compare when looking at electric vehicles. The other thing that's important to know about your electric vehicles is the efficiency. We're all familiar with miles per gallon in the gas world. It measures the efficiency of gas vehicles. In the electric vehicle world, it's called MPGE for miles per gallon equivalent, which is basically how many miles you get on 33.7 kilowatt hours of electrical energy, which the EPA equated to 1 gallon of gas. The bottom line is compare MPGE to MPGE. Compare apples to apples, and also compare vehicles of like size, just like you would do in a gas vehicle. You wouldn't compare a small car to a big pickup truck because the miles per gallon would differ quite a bit. Same thing in electrical vehicle world. Compare like vehicles. And I did this for you in this particular to show my two vehicles that I have owned, the Ford Mach-E, the 2021 standard range all-wheel drive, and the 2023 Model Y Tesla that I have that is the long-range version. And notice the difference in MPGE is quite significant. The Tesla has an MPGE, and this is combined MPGE of 122 versus the Ford of 93, which tells you that that Tesla is 30% more efficient, which means it's going to use less electricity and even save me more money. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at electric vehicles. Now, another important aspect of electric vehicles is their charging capabilities. And there's two different charging capabilities of each vehicle, and you must know, or you should know, their limits and how they perform in those two areas. And the first one I have here is the vehicle's AC charge limit. The AC charger, or the slow charger, which is typically the charging type that you have in your home and in public municipal places. There's the slow chargers, but they're very important because I say if you have an electric vehicle, the best way to get the most out of your electric vehicles is to charge at home, where electric prices are typically cheaper than gas prices. I'm showing you that the key thing that you need to know in that area is what's the maximum power that vehicle can charge at. That'll tell you how fast it can charge with an AC charger, because they do vary. And I show you a comparison between the Ford Mach-E that I had and the Tesla Model Y that I currently have. You can look at that power in different ways. One way is just look at the maximum current, because they're running at 240 volts. And you can see it's 30 amps for the Ford and 48 for the Tesla. So it's a little better there. In kilowatts, it's 7 kilowatts versus 11. But more importantly, in the time to charge, if you're looking at charging, then you're talking about 10 to 11 hours for the Ford to fully charge from 0 to 100 in my home at the maximum rate, versus 7 to 8 hours with the Tesla. Now, if that's important, this is something that you want to know. You also have to keep in mind that even plug-in hybrids have limits, but they're not as important. If you're buying a plug-in hybrid, typically you're only charging at 110. But they also can charge at 240 volts too. The other thing that you want to be aware of is the DC fast charging limits of that vehicle. Now, the DC fast chargers are typically used when you're going on road trips, when you're going distances further than the range of your vehicle. And the key thing to know is really how fast does those DC fast chargers charge with your particular vehicle. Once again, vehicles differ quite a bit in their capabilities here. So the one easy thing to find out, and it's typically in the specs, is the maximum charge rate in kilowatts for DC fast charging. And I show you here a couple differences between the Ford Mach-E standard range I had, which sometimes it's advertised at 150 kilowatts. I never got anywhere near it. Typically people show 115 kilowatts because that's realistically what I got as the maximum. And then on the Tesla, the maximum is 250 kilowatts. And obviously the higher the number here, the faster it's going to charge. But the key point that you need to know around these maximum charge rate is that often the vehicle doesn't charge at that max charge rate for very long. And so you have to know more than just the maximum charge rates. And that's why I think one of the best things that you can find is what is the charge time from 10 to 80% state of charge. And that will give you a more realistic, real world time of how long is it going to take to charge. And I compare right here my Ford Mach-E versus my Tesla Model Y in that 10 to 80% range. Now, the 10 to 80% range is a figure that's calculated through some testing. And unfortunately, many of the manufacturers don't give you this number. Some do, some don't. And I'm hoping that many of the auto manufacturers start doing this. If not, I think some of these magazines like Consumer Reports and Car and Driver, Motor Trend will start doing this for every vehicle that they evaluate so that you have a means of comparison for this, because this is pretty important. And you can see the difference between the Tesla and the Ford. Now, one of the other areas that I believe is pretty important for knowing in your electric vehicle is the battery management capabilities. And what I mean by this is the thermal management of the battery. As you know, batteries are sensitive to temperature, especially the extreme temperatures, the extreme cold and extreme heat. And so you need to have a vehicle that manages that battery thermal capabilities very well in order to maintain consistent range and performance of your electric vehicles. And electric vehicles do differ in this area because some vehicles put in technology or better technology to manage the battery thermals. For example, one of the things that I think is important in an electric vehicle is preconditioning the battery for charging. Like if you're on a road and you're going to charge and the weather's pretty cold, the preconditioning aspects of the battery warm up the battery so that when you get to the charger, you're going to get the most efficient energy transfer between that charger and your vehicle. In other words, you'll get the full battery charging speed that you're capable of. If you're not, if that battery's too cold or too warm, you won't get that and it'll be slower and you spend more time there. Now, some vehicles have built into it a automatic feature that if you indicate on the navigation system that you're going into a charger, it'll start preconditioning the battery so that by the time you reach that particular charger, your battery is at the proper temperature and you're going to get the quickest charging session that you can get. Others have manual capabilities there. Well, you can turn on that conditioning manually. Obviously, auto is a much better thing. The other thing, and this is one area that is very difficult to find information about electric vehicle battery management because it's not in any of the specs. But one of the areas that seem to be in the cars, the electric vehicles that manage battery thermals the best, is they tend to have a heat pump. Tesla is one example of that. They do a very good job of managing the thermals in that particular vehicle. And hence that if you find some testing, and this website recurrent.com does a good job of showing you the differences between particular electric vehicles on how their range varies with temperature with these particular graphs that I'm showing you here and the chart to the right, you can see that, the Ford Mach-E, its range, its efficiency falls off a lot quicker or a lot more at the lower temperatures than the Tesla Model Y. And you also got to keep in mind that there is a drop off if you live in a climate where you got hot temperatures too. You have some degradation in the efficiency and the range of the vehicle when the temperatures get into the 90s or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So those are another area to look at and make sure you know how your vehicle is going to do in extreme weather conditions, especially if that's a climate that you live in or you're going to drive in more often. The next area that I think is important is look at the vehicle warranty. Now, they do differ. Typically, every vehicle is a bumper warranty. With electric vehicles, they also have a drivetrain and an electric battery warranty. And so just for comparison's sake, I took my Ford Mach-E to the Tesla Model Y that I currently have and show you the differences between the different types of warranties that these manufacturers have. And you can see that there is some variation. And you can see that Tesla has a little better warranty than Ford does on the car itself. Something else to keep in mind. And the last area that I think that you might want to consider looking at from electric vehicle point of view is the acceleration. Some people, this is very important to them. They want a fast car. They want it to go from 0 to 60 in, 3 seconds or so. Well, if that's important, then make sure you look at the acceleration figures for this. I just bring it up. To me, acceleration is important, but I don't have to have the fastest car out there. If I wanted to, I would have got maybe the performance version of the Tesla. To me, going from 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds is plenty fast for me, but this acceleration does vary. You can find some electric vehicles that go from 0 to 60 in 9 seconds or 8 seconds, and maybe that's not fast enough for you. So you may want to make sure that you look at a comparison between the vehicles that you're looking at and see if that's an important figure in your purchasing decision. Well, I've kind of run through all these various areas to try to help you understand that there's a lot to an electric vehicle that you may not be aware of, and it's a lot different when comparing cars as compared to gas vehicles. So I hope I brought those to light and you found those useful and you have a better understanding of that. Thanks for watching my video. I'll catch you next time.